We now complete the example we began in graph 23.7. We've assumed that there are two types of consumers who differ in the preference parameter theta, where theta 2 is greater than theta 1, and type 2 consumers are high demand consumers, whereas type 2 consumers are low demand consumers. We began in graph 23.7 by illustrating what the demand curve looks like for these consumers given the mathematical formulation we've chosen. Then, in graph 23.8, we restricted the second-degree price discriminating monopolist to using a single fixed fee and a single per unit price in his pricing formula. In graph 23.9, we then allowed the monopolist to charge different fixed fees but the same per unit price. And we'll now complete the exercise by allowing the monopolist to choose different fixed fees and different per unit prices aimed at the two types of consumers. We again begin by illustrating the two demand curves for the two types of consumers. In panel C of graph 23.5, we illustrated that the second-degree price discriminating monopolist will want to restrict the quantity consumed by low-demand consumers in order to make the low-demand package relatively unattractive to high-demand consumers and thus be able to charge high-demand consumers higher fixed fees. This is equivalent to setting a relatively high per unit price for low-demand consumers. The pricing policy aimed at high-demand consumers, on the other hand, would try to get them to buy as much as possible and then take as much as possible of their consumer surplus in a fixed fee. The per unit price aimed at high-demand consumers will therefore be set at marginal cost, which is equal to C. In order to mathematically calculate some of the triangles we'll illustrate in a moment, we'll also need to derive the price that we could charge to type 2 consumers if we wanted them to consume only X1 of the goods. The pricing package aimed at low-demand consumers will then set a per unit price P bar and a fixed fee equal to the shaded triangle above P bar up to the blue demand curve. This implies that type 1 consumers will consume X1 and will get no consumer surplus. The monopolist, on the other hand, will make profit equal to the shaded blue area. High-demand consumers, on the other hand, will be charged a per unit price equal to C and a fixed fee equal to the sum of the blue and the magenta shaded areas. This leaves high-demand consumers a consumer surplus equal to the shaded green area if they buy at the per unit price C the quantity X2 and then pay the fixed fee equal to the blue and the magenta areas. The shaded green area is equal to the consumer surplus that high-demand consumers would get if they mimicked low-demand consumers and bought X1 at the per unit price P bar and paid the fixed fee equal to the shaded triangle above P bar up to the blue demand curve. The profit for the monopolist from encountering a high-demand type is then equal to the sum of the shaded blue and the shaded magenta areas. Once we understand this picture, deriving the two pricing formulas mathematically becomes relatively straightforward. First, we know that the per unit price charged to high-demand consumers will be equal to marginal cost C. Second, we know that we're going to set a per unit price aimed at low-demand consumers at P bar somewhere above the marginal cost C. The fixed fee that we can charge to low-demand consumers then depends on where we set P bar, with that fixed fee simply being equal to the triangle that's formed above P bar up to the blue demand curve. P bar furthermore determines how much of a fixed fee we can charge to high-demand consumers, because P bar determines where the shaded blue area will be, and it determines the size of the shaded magenta area. Thus, everything the monopolist could possibly care about depends on P bar. If the monopolist now knows the fraction of the population that's low demand and the fraction of the population that's high demand, he can define the expected profit as a function of P bar. This is done in equation 23.41, and the monopolist's profit maximization problem is then defined in equation 23.42, where the monopolist chooses P bar to maximize her expected profit. Solving this maximization problem gives us the optimal or profit maximizing P bar. We then have the per unit price we'll charge to low demand consumers, and we already know the per unit price charged to high demand consumers is the marginal cost C. Furthermore, once we know P bar, we can calculate the fixed fees charged to low demand consumers and to high demand consumers by simply calculating the relevant areas.